our first speaker is Chris Heilmann, sitting right here. That was probably a big clue. Chris just informed me this morning that to use a remote dongle, the power button has to be on, which I thought was really profound, really informative, and amazing. Anything else I can do to embarrass you while you're setting up?
You've done so much.
I know. Chris was like, how can you introduce me? I'm like, well, we needed to increase that ratio of gingers to non-gingers, so at least 2 to 150, from 1 to 150. So I don't know if that's accurate or not, just rambling on while Chris gets set up. If you don't know Chris, he's a well-known speaker. He's does important things at Microsoft, somewhat related to the web maybe. He's built some things. He and I met, like 15 or 20 years ago now, when he was at Yahoo, I think working on YUI stuff, or at least part of that, and I was doing Dojo and frameworky stuff. And we've pretty much trolled each other ever since, so it's good.
I'm going to talk about 7 developer tool secrets that shouldn't be secrets. I'm the principal PM for developer tools in Microsoft Edge, and that means the browser that's based on Chromium, which also means that everything I do goes back into the Chromium project, which also means Chrome and Brave and other browsers have the thing there. And I've been living in these developer tools for 1.5 years now, and doing like a lot of documentation, understanding them, trying to see what's going on there. And I find that there's a lot of stuff in there that we don't use and don't know. And I don't know why we don't use and don't know that. That's why I wanted to talk about these secrets that aren't secrets. I'm going to spill the beans. I was thinking about buying some beans and spilling them here, but it was not a good idea. It's great to see you all in person again. This has been my life the last 2 years, presenting to a camera on my computer and not making jokes because I don't know if the audience is asleep or whatever they do, and it makes no sense to have no feedback to an audience. I coach people on public speaking, and getting this feedback is unnerving, it's stressful, but it's also so good. Just talking to your camera is not fun because it's actually not a human connection. I try to fix that by putting that little fox next to my computer, and it's not a womble. People in Germany don't know what a womble is, but it looks like one, I know. But don't knock it, it really works. You talk to this thing and it's much better than just talking to the camera or to the empty room. But its responses are limited, at least the first few weeks, and then it gets weird. But that's basically what I've been living in. And I also had video shoots at home in my flat. It's just bizarre to be out again. It's great to see you people there. Now, the first thing that anybody uses in the developer tools is console. And we love console, and we love console logging, and we log everything. I mean, how many times have you gone to a function and you said like log X to see if the function has been called? Doesn't mean anything, doesn't help you really, probably doesn't get deleted, and then end users have 10,000 X's in their console without knowing what they actually mean. Breakpoint debugging has been around for decades, and we don't use it because putting a console log somewhere in is much, much easier, because every coding camp that we have starts with a print command or with a console log command. We always get taught that debugging means you have to write something in your code that you have to delete afterwards again. And that's something that is so ingrained it's bizarre. And of course it creates a lot of noise. The general websites, any website that you open nowadays, is this avalanche of information that you don't need. And probably people don't need anymore because it has been fixed already. But we don't take them out, and actually slows down the browser, it slows down your site. It's not a good idea. So the first thing to learn is that you can filter console messages. You can filter them by warning, by error, by info, and that way your peace of mind is so much more than it was before. So look into filtering to make sure that you're actually only seeing the things that you need at that time. Another big thing that we do is just we console a console log width, console log height, and then we get a number. And then in our console, we have no idea what this number is any longer after a while. We just keep it in there and we don't understand it. The simplest way to work around that is use the curls. Just put curlies around of those, and then it will always say like height is 94, width is 175. You don't need to type that in. The browser does that automatically for you. So that's a very simple trick to actually make your logging a bit better. Interesting also to add to your vocabulary, there's log, there's info, error, and warn. Error is there to throw an error to maintainers, so that's a very important log to put in there. And they also give you little icons and look differently, so that's another way to actually get your information much easier readable for yourself. There's error and assert. Error is for throwing an error, and assert is for doing an assert statement. So often you find yourself going to your source code, if something console log this. This is unnecessary code, because for the final running thing, unless you're actually using something for the console, it should be removed again. So an assert allows you to get rid of that if statement and just do it in one console logging message there. Trace is also interesting. As I said, often you do like function console log x and then like has been called by what. We have no idea. By using console trace, you get a trace that shows you which function called which, and you can step back the trace that way. You don't need to do that by hand either anymore. Console group allows you to group messages. So you can say like, I start a group with a certain name, and then I put console logs in there, and I can also generate that on the fly. So that gives you an expandable version of a log. So instead of seeing 30,000 things, you can see like, this is what came from that, this is what came from that. It's another interesting little thing to use. Console table is something that people don't use enough either, and console table is really great because it gives you a tabular display of the data. So in this case, I'm reading out all the H1s, Ps, and scripts of the page. You can use highly sophisticated CSS selectors that way, and then you can show the table, and this is useless. But you can, as a second parameter, say only give me the node name, the inner text, and the offset height, and then you get a sortable table directly in the console. You can also highlight that one and copy and paste it into anything that takes rich text, like Word, Excel, emails, these kind of things. The tabular data, the structure stays that way. So in case you need to do reporting, that's a very simple thing to do as well. The dollar and the dollar sign or bling is, I mean, whenever you use it, people say like, oh, jQuery, and it's not jQuery. It's actually built into the console. It's defined by the W3C. And it actually is the same as document query selector and document query selector all, except it also gives you all the array functions that the other ones doesn't do, because it's a node collection rather than an array. But in this one, it overrides it, so you actually have an array. So you can say like, give me all the links and map them, and then only give me the href, and the text is the inner text. And that way, you can actually get the list of all the links as URL and text. So you can do really highly sophisticated DOM scripting directly in the console using these convenience methods that people don't use too much either. Now, we love using console log in our own code, but we sometimes want to inspect other people's code as well. And the best way to do that is breakpoints or remote debugging. But there's also a very simple thing that people keep underusing, and I did a video on TikTok last week because they asked me to. I don't know TikTok, don't know why. But basically, they asked me to do it, on log points and live expressions. Live expressions are a thing that basically, if you have a lot of data that you want to show, the log should become unreadable. So in this case, the demo that you probably don't see on the screen much is that I'm using the mouse position and I'm reading it out, and it's pretty pointless, because by the time I moved it, it's gone again. A live expression allows me to click that I and say X and Y, and it stays pinned on top of the console and only shows me that data there. You also see that in my source code, I don't need to use a console log any longer. I just do the live expression on top of any code on the web. This could be my own code, or actually third-party code as well, if the X and Y is available in the global space or in the context where you're reading it out. So this is really nice because it doesn't slow down your machine. It actually doesn't mean you have to put a console log. You can put these live expressions on anything and they stay up there, so you don't have to scroll back up to find the outlier in your data that you came for. Log points are in the sources panel. In the sources panel, you could go to any JavaScript and actually say add a log point where you want to do it. And once you set that, you get asked for the expression that you want to do, in this case data, again with the curlies around it. And then every time you, then it sets the log point for you. And anytime you interact with the document, it actually does that console log for you. So it means you can inject a console log into any other website and read out the data that way. So that way you can debug MSN.com, whatever other websites you want to. You can also log outside the browser. So console log is not only for the browser developer tools. If you're using Visual Studio Code and you hit that F5 or that run and debug session, you can select which browser you want to have to debug with. So you can say Chrome, you can say Edge, you can say Firefox as well, I think, but it needs the Chromium browser is the one that you want in this case. And then you get a dedicated browser for your session at the moment. So you don't open your localhost on another tab in the browser that you're using anyways, but you have a dedicated browser just for this session right now. And in the bottom, in the debug console, you get the console. And this is not just a console logging, this is a full extension of the console of the browser. So you can see you have your console logging here, you got access to the window object, you got access to the $convenience methods, and so on and so forth. So you can use anything that you use in the console in developer tools inside Visual Studio Code without leaving it. And that's actually much easier because you don't jump between two windows all the time. You can inject code into any other site using snippets and overrides. That's something that I've been using for quite a while. And often people write an extension or they write a bookmarklet to do that. You don't need that. You have that built into the developer tools as well. So this is a more sophisticated little DOM script that I've written that gets all the headings of a markdown generated HTML file and gives me the text and the link to the generated fragment identifier. And then I just console log that out to copy and paste somewhere else. You can put that in the snippets editor in the sources tool, and then you give it a name, and you can actually run it with like Shift and Command Enter, or by pressing the plus button. And that one runs against any website that's open in the browser at the moment. So I use that, for example, when I got really annoying galleries that make me click 15 buttons to go from one image to another. I just scrape all the images and put them on console log for me to make it that way. So DOM scripting that way is really cool. And using the command palette, Command Shift P, you can use an exclamation mark and then it actually the name of the snippet to run it that way. So you don't even have to go through the sources pane to do that. If you don't use the command palette yet, it's one of the best things ever. Anything in the developer tools that you want to turn on, to change, to do something with, there's a command for that. You don't need to know which panel to turn on and which button to click. It's all available for you with a keyboard shortcut as well, which is very important because we made that available for people who can't see, who can't use a mouse. Accessibility is super important for us in this environment as well. Overrides allow you to take any resource of the web. So for example, on the Microsoft Docs side, I'm using the site LTR CSS and save it locally. And the next time you load the page, this local copy will get loaded instead of the third-party one. So that way you can actually debug things that are hard to actually debug. I work with the Outlook team, with the Office team the other day, and they have a 15 megabyte JavaScript that's basically the end of a build process. And the build process takes like 3 minutes and like 5 signups or whatever to make it go. And then they use overrides to actually edit the generated file and debug it that way, and then go back to the main source to actually build it there. So overrides are a really cool thing to override annoying things as well. Like if somebody has like 6,000 pop-up windows, you can just override that JavaScript and will never ever get loaded again. But it will not be blocked, so the ad blocker will still be okay, because you're loading just something else that you have locally. You can inspect and debug much more than you know. The developer tools in Chromium are actually built into any app that uses Electron as well. And that means you hitting that Command Shift I or Command Shift J in some of them means you can open the developer tools and see how the tool was done. GitHub Desktop, for example, you can analyze how GitHub Desktop works, what HTML, CSS, and JavaScript they've written to create GitHub Desktop. You can also inspect Visual Studio Code. That's how I do my mock-ups for things that I'm going to do in Visual Studio Code. Instead of using Photoshop, I'm just using HTML, CSS, and edit the file directly, and then take screenshots of it. You can also debug the browser developer tools using the browser developer tools. So when you undock them into an own window, you get the developer tools as an own window. You can then open developer tools again, and you get the second instance of developer tools debugging the other developer tools. So this is how we built the developer tools as well, and how we debug them. You can go deeper as well if you want to. If you have enough RAM, you can go 16 levels deep if you want to. But the dev tools in VS Code are the ones that actually are bringing in there. But what I wanted to have is have to stop jumping from the editor to the browser and back. So if you think back to what I showed earlier, that when you use the debugging workflow, you get a dedicated browser and you get the console directly in Visual Studio Code without having to leave Visual Studio Code. If you use Edge as your browser, sadly enough it doesn't work with any of the others yet, you get this extra button called Inspect. And if you hit that Inspect button, you get the browser developer tools inside Visual Studio Code. And the browser is just basically a window to debug and visually see what you're doing. So you have the direct connection between your source code and the debugging rather than having to jump between browser and Visual Studio all the time. So here's some dirty secrets. Who's playing games? Okay, that's a weird sound. Some dirty secrets. People use only a small fraction of DevTools. There's 182 different tools inside the tools. It's a really complicated HTML, JavaScript, and CSS tool. That's what actually we built them in. You don't need to use C# or C++ or anything to actually contribute to them. But we basically use the sources panel, the console, and maybe if you're lucky, the styles pane is the biggest one that people use. But most of the other stuff is in there, and somebody thought at one time or another that it's great that it's in there, but nobody ever uses it. Again, that's just the data that we're seeing. And we get 1% of all the Edge users on the planet use the developer tools. It's still a few million people, but it's only 1%. So it's always quite fun when we see developers are the most important people out there. And you're like, yeah, they are, but at the same time, there's more people that get confused about this. We had a ton of feedback that people were confused about the developer tools opening. I got hacked. I'm seeing a console in my browser. And the reason was that there's lots of faulty keyboards with an F12 key with dirt under it or something, or people tried to change the volume on a Mac and turned on the developer tools accidentally. So now we have a feature that if you turn it on for the first time, pressing F12, it asks you, do you want the developer tools or was it a mistake? And basically when it's a mistake, we never show you that thing again. We lost half of our users that way and our managers weren't happy. But I explained to them that we lost unhappy users. We didn't lose users. We lost people that accidentally went there and didn't want to go there, and that made them happy again, so that's good. I thought it was documentation. I thought things are not documented. That's why I wrote a lot of documentation and commented a lot of things and get step-by-step information. And oh my God, writing documentation for developer tools is annoying because you're more or less describing things that people should do. And as we need to be fully accessible, I always had to avoid things like right-click. It's called context click. And like press a button is activate a button because there's 12 different ways to activate the button rather than just pressing it, and so on and so forth. Turns out documentation is the last effort. It's when people don't find anything on Stack Overflow or on Facebook or on Twitter, then they go to the documentation. And it's the same. I mean, I bought a TV the other day. I'm not going to read the documentation of that. I'm turning it on, and when it doesn't work, I'm going to complain that it's shit. You know, like the documentation is the last thing that we read. But I'm doing a lot of work there, so please read it. It's good. The thing to me is that developer tools, and that's been my credo for quite a while now, developer tools should not expect people to be experts, but turn them into experts over time. The more you use a developer tool, the more it should teach you what it can do for you, the more it should lead you on the golden path of becoming more effective, rather than having to know what you're doing. If I open the developer tools flame chart in the performance thing, I have no idea. It's pretty colors, but that's about it. I have to watch a 50-minute video from a JavaScript conference 10 years ago that explains what that flame chart means to understand it. This is not a good experience. I want simpler tools that do the right job. So one thing we're working on is sorting the tools into use cases. So instead of giving you the kitchen sink and all these 187 tools at the same time, you get a sidebar on it that actually gives you the inspector, it gives you the mobile emulation, and then it gives you the home, which is the most used tools that we realized, and then it gives you a web development experience where you only get the sources pane and you only get the console, a debugging experience where you get your sources and the debugger, and I have no idea, that's performance, a performance tool and something else. But we're working on that one right now to make it easier for you to customize these tools to your needs rather than getting all the tools every single time. And we found that quite useful for people when we do user research in people that just start in the market and start as developers. You also have this little question mark icon that if you turn that one on, you get an overlay and you can move your mouse around anywhere in the tools, and it has a little overlay explaining to you what that tool is and what you can do with it. So that way it actually gets that first step of like what the hell's going on out of the way as well. The dirtiest secret I found lately is that we're not yet fully integrated into the development process. There's a one big gap, and I don't know if you, we don't even see it as a problem anymore, but I found it just very unnerving to me. Now, we write code in our editor, IDE, WebStorm, whatever you want to do, and then we go to the browser and check if everything is okay. And then we go to the browser developer tools to tweak the things, like the flexbox layout, the pixels, make it rounder, make it prettier, just find out why the CSS wasn't applied, try to understand specificity or try to pronounce specificity, which is not easy either. And then we're stuck because we're done with the changes in the developer tools, and now what? The process in every developer tool out there in browsers right now is a bloody copy and paste. You change those tweaks around, and then you have to redo everything in your CSS that you've done before. Now we have a changes tab in Chromium browsers that shows you like all the files that got changed by that interaction in the styles pane, and it shows you what was deleted and what was added. And Firefox has a live one as well, where it actually changes that while you do things around, and then you can say copy all changes, which gives you an HTML document with commented out and commented things. But it's still a crutch. I still think it's bizarre that we, after 10 years of having these developer tools, the last step is copy and paste and hope you copy it back into the right section of the source code that it came from. So I annoyed my team yesterday by making sure that this is live. It's called CSS Mirror Editing, and it's part of the extension that I showed earlier, that you have the developer tools inside Visual Studio Code. And you can turn it on and off here. And what that does now is when I use the style editor to change things, it changes the source code as well. So instead of having to copy and paste it, you get a live change of the things in the source tab, in the source that you came from. Right now it does it only with CSS files. We're working on Sass, we're working on source map stuff. There's a lot of source map files in very weird configurations out there. But I totally love that because it's not changing it live. It doesn't change the file. It doesn't trigger a reload or something. But it just shows me at the end what the file would be like, and then I can save it and bring it back into my version controlling. And I have a full two-way interaction between the tools and the source code that I came from. So we really want feedback on this one. So we made sure that we actually put it in there and make it easy for you to do feedback. And that's the last secret that I'm going to cover. You're the audience and the client of developer tools. If you don't understand them, if they're too complex, we failed, not you. You're not too stupid for those things. These things are too complex for you if you don't understand them. So please, please contribute, send us information back, tell us what's wrong in those things, because we can only assume what's wrong, and if we make assumptions, bad things happen. Remember Windows 8? You know. Good products thrive on input. We need information, and that's why in context we made sure that you can report a bug, you can request a feature, this one gets you to GitHub, the repo, and actually have a nice little template for you to fill out. We have a feedback link directly at the CSS mirror editing thing, so you actually don't need to learn where to actually give feedback. You can do that in context, and it works with any tool really well. Give people a chance to give feedback, and you will get information. It's open source on GitHub, so you can open issues, and that's my life, that I basically go through there and delete them and understand them all the time. And there is actually an inbuilt feedback mechanism. And I wanted to make it more obvious that it's there by giving this little arrow here. And this is this speech bubble thing person. And when you click on that one, it actually gives you an interface that shows you, okay, describe what was happening. The URL automatically gets filled in. You can include your email address if we have more questions, which would be a good thing to do. You can send diagnostic data if you want to. You can include a screenshot that we automatically generated for you. And you can add attachments and recreate my problems and send that off. And this goes directly into our bug queue. This goes directly into our feedback queue after some bots ran through it, because we get about 80,000 a week and feedback things, most of them rubbish, but some of them are really, really important and really interesting. And that's all I had. This is my team. I'm the one who brings coffee. There's Erica, there's Rachel, there's Zohar. This is the PM team. We also got 35 engineers right now, and the slides are online with all the resources that I talked about. So I hope some secrets are not secrets anymore right now, and you're going to be better with developer tools. And they're free. Use them. Thank you.
So you have time for a couple questions if you want while we get Cassie set up?
Sure.
Sorry about the background noise, we're working on it, but it's always, most half stacks have some problem with audio or video, so it's just a tradition we're keeping alive regardless of where we go.
And yes, it's a Mac and I'm using Edge. Get over it. You promised me questions, you don't have any. That's how he treats me. It's always horrible.
Well, I was expecting the audience to have questions.
Any questions? Are there any questions? Yes.
So basically the tool that you described to us on Micro Visual Studio, they're actually for Microsoft Edge, or can be used from Firefox and another browsers?
The embedded developer tools.
That's the question.
Yeah, okay. The question was like the developer tools that I showed embedded in Visual Studio Code, if they're only with Edge and not with other browsers, yes. We're thinking about, we contribute everything back up and offer it, but if others don't take it on, then we can't do it, and reverse engineering Firefox is something that we don't get paid for. I used to work for Firefox before, so I know that people could do it, but for right now, it was much easier to do it in Edge because we're actually working with the VS Code team next to each other, would be the story if we were still working in offices, but we're actually very close with each other, so it was easy. And as VS Code is actually based on Electron, it also uses Chromium under the hood, so we could use the CDP methods to integrate with that one. So Chrome could take that on as well. We'll see if that happens or not. All right?